Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. And welcome to the Don't Wake the Dragon Interior Makes series. Making slump and hump molds. These slump and hump molds will be making an appearance as I make the serviceware for the interior part of the dragon. So let's do this. I went a little crazy trying to find objects to make my slump and hump molds. I really wanted plastic. Plastic makes it a lot easier because I'm going to be pouring plaster directly into them, and I want it to be able to just pop right out. And I also did not want to buy something that was going to be too expensive in the event that I need to break the plastic out. I was not looking at the exterior of the piece and I was focusing on the interior, but I did find this one bowl that I thought was really interesting. This is at the Dollar Tree and it's fluted on the outside, so this is one of those objects where it's a great shape, but if I was to pour this as a hump mold, it's a very subtle fluting on the inside and I'd lose any of that texture. So a shape like this that has all of that texture on the outside, this is going to be best left for a slump mold. Inspect the interiors. You want to make sure that you don't have any weirdness happening. Like for example, I could not pour this lid. It has these little tabs that are inside, and that if I'm pouring plaster in them, that's a spot that could be potentially problematic. In this case, I would probably take my Dremel, cut that out, Dremel that down flat so I don't have that issue. This base would be a nice square shape. This one, I really love the interior shape, but it has these two little things that is meant to be a handle of a lid. I will pour this one. After it gets popped out, I'm gonna have to do another pour and fill in the holes. Then I have this tray, this bowl, dog bowl, another large bowl. This object is meant to be a planter. There's two separate sets. The base is going to be better for a slump mold, and then the top, I will use this as a hump mold. I'm going to be pouring plaster into this so I can get a hump mold, but I'm going to have to alter it. I have to take out this insert because I don't want that there. The rest of these are ready to go. Hump molds are probably the easiest freaking thing to make if you don't have a complicated situation like this. All I'm doing is mixing up some plaster, pouring it into these forms, letting it harden, and then cracking it out. And that's all there is to it, if you're not altering the mold. I'm gonna just try first with my wire cutters and see if I can, yeah, I had a feeling that would do it. So I want to pop out anything that's going to be a high point. I'll go in and sand that, smooth it after, but I'm going to get the bits off as best I can. I'm going to do the same down here because I want this to be flat. Let's try a pocket knife. It is, after all, plastic, and that'll do it. I'm gonna take a little bit of sandpaper and clean up these little bits. Alright, I got my interior sanded up, but now I gotta plug this hole. I have this food container sitting around, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut it so I can use the bottom of it. I changed my mind. I don't like the way that that one fits, so I found a different container. I have my hot glue gun heating up over here because I'm gonna hot glue it down. And then, as a precaution, I'll be taping up the bottom. It is time to mix up our plaster, and let's talk a minute about plaster safety. You want to wear a mask, and you definitely don't want to go plunging your hand into the plaster as you start mixing it. Plaster does heat up and becomes a chemical reaction, and you will develop a burn on your hands, and it won't be right away. It'll probably be the next day where the burn starts to set in. The type of plaster I'm using is #1 pottery plaster. This plaster is made for working with ceramics. It is porous enough to absorb the excess water. Whether it's pouring wet slip into your mold or using a slab of clay, the plaster will absorb the moisture in the clay and allow for a good release. I also have a mixing cup and a stick, and when I begin mixing this, I'm gonna stop talking so I don't end up ingesting the plaster, and I can put a mask on. Some people measure and weigh out the water and measure the plaster. That is a way too complicated for me. So I just fill up my bucket with the amount of water that I think I need, and it's gonna grow in volume a little less than double the volume of what you have. And I am doing this on a rainy day, so I need to be adding just a slight bit more plaster than I would on a sunshiny day. I don't disturb the surface of the water. I just begin adding my plaster, and I continue to add plaster until I see a mountain form that no longer dissolves. And in a bucket this size, I'm looking for probably about a 2.5 to 3 inch mountain in each direction. That is the cutoff point for me to go, okay, I have plenty of plaster and now I can begin mixing. Okay, so that's the mountain if it was a sunshiny day. See, it's eroding slightly, but not quite as much. Because I have this rainy day, I'm adding a little bit more plaster. It's going to take longer to set in this weather. Off to the side, I have a 5-gallon bucket filled with water, and that is my rinse bucket. It's my bucket to rinse all of my tools because I do not want to put any kind of plaster down your sink. Plaster will clog the drains, and it will be a very, very expensive plumbing problem that you really do not want to deal with. I'm just going to mix this up to try and get as many of the lumps out as I can, and then once I do that, it's pour time. Now at this point, I want to make sure I have a level surface. If you don't have a level surface, you're going to want to have some shims, but this looks pretty okay. Hammer out some of those bubbles. You can kind of come in and sort of do that. I'm going to continue on filling up all of my molds, repeating that process. These are going to have to set to harden, probably take it at least a day, especially in this weather. As these hump molds set, I'm going to begin to prep my slump molds. For the slump molds, it's a little bit more complicated. It isn't just to pour the plaster in and go. You're going to need to set them up on some kind of base that is water resistant. You can buy this big sheet of melamine. It's basically shelving. I just took a 4x8 sheet and cut them into the pieces that I need to make myself some cottle boards and a baseboard. I have this strip of wood that has been glued on to the end of this. I use 4 of them, and then you use a set of clamps to come in and clamp them to each other. Determining the proper size of cottle boards is dependent on the piece that you're casting. If you have a very large piece, you want about 3 to 4 inches above that piece. If it is a smaller piece, you can get away with about 2 inches all around it. I prepped the top of this, and I put in a piece of plastic and sealed it off there. This base will be the open part. Now I'm just going to take some fresh clay and roll some coil and get it stuck on there. This is just B-mix. I prefer to use white clay whenever I'm making molds. Making molds with red clay stains the plaster. Alright, now I'm gonna give it a squish, get it to stick down. So I got that pressed down, and I'm going to squish this down, and then I'm gonna clean this up. Whatever I leave here in the rim is gonna be visible in the mold. Now I'm gonna set up my cottle boards. So I've got myself a clamp. You're gonna be using that little edge thing to hold the clamp. And I'm gonna tighten my clamp from the back side, pulls the 2 pieces together. I am gonna be smacking in some coil all around the bottom edge and up through the side seams. This is not something that you can set up and then come back to do the pour. Because you're working with this clay, it's got to be done in the same day. If the clay dries out, it'll pull away from the seam line. You'll end up with the possibility of leaks. If you're gonna do it, you gotta do it. You gotta commit to the time in the studio to get the mold made from start to finish. Otherwise, you're gonna have a giant plaster mess and have to start over. This is pretty much the same process, similar process to 2-part mold making, 3-part mold making. I am gonna be doing a 3-part mold making video very soon. That will be of a mug because I need it for the dragon. I have done 2-part molds, but I have not done multiple part molds. If you're interested in that content, keep an eye out. It will be coming. Normally I have Plastilube around. I have no idea where it is. This is just some dish liquid. It will do the same. I'm using it as just a secondary precaution. Because this is plastic, it shouldn't stick, but this will act as a mold release just in case. This was a bit textured. I was worried, and I probably should have put this onto the base before I did the slump part of it, but too late now. This is why we buy cheap plastic for this kind of thing, because then we don't feel bad when we destroy it. There is a possibility that I'm going through all this work and maybe just a giant disaster. We don't know. That is the mystery of working with anything ceramic related. Now the next move is to mix up plaster the same way I have done for the other molds and pour it in here. And I'm going to be aiming to try and be a good 4 inches above. I have some dry erase markers that are perfect for this. Give myself a nice line here against this. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up plaster, pour it in here. You don't need to see that part. You'll watch me do it for the hump molds. Good morning. So yesterday, this mold took a heck of a lot of plaster, way more than I had expected. And I had planned on doing slump mold of this one. But unfortunately, I'm running out of plaster and it is about an hour-and-a-half drive for me to go get more plaster. So I did not cast this one. Anyhow, I'm gonna take apart these molds. It is unfortunate that these molds I cannot put to use just yet. They take at least 2 to 3 weeks to dry out in order to use for the slab process. And if I'm using them as a slip cast pour mold, that takes even longer. It takes about a month or so, depending on the size of the mold. Y'all get to see them in action. It's just that they need time to dry. If you are not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button if you're enjoying this content. Okay, I'm gonna unmold. Let's see what's going on. So now while it's just getting unmolded, this is the next morning, but it's been raining all week and it's planning on raining for the next 3 days, which is gonna take my dry time even longer. I'm easily able to carve up these edges just to give it a nice bevel. That means the plaster is not really fully curing that quickly. You go through all of this trouble and you don't know if you're gonna have success. Then you gotta wait months for it to dry, if you even figure out if even that's a success. You want to make sure that any clay that comes in contact with this plaster gets thrown away. I usually use junk clay. When wet plaster gets incorporated into the clay, if the clay goes to the kiln mistakenly, it can explode. Okay, here we go. Wow. There's a lot of moisture in this plaster, and even though these cottle boards are coated, you really want to be sure that you clean them up right away so that they're not exposed to too much water for any length of time. Let's see what's going on. A little bit of plaster leak out, not too much though. Pattern is the piece that I'm casting a copy of. It's called a pattern, and it is a bit stuck because I have what's known as an undercut. So right along this edge, some of the plaster ran over. The seal between the plastic piece and the clay was not quite good enough. The plaster just sort of rolled over where that clay is. So I'm just gently gonna take away some of that plaster that's holding it back. I'm cutting into this plaster and there's a ridge here that creates an undercut. The same happens in your pattern piece. Sometimes you have undercuts. And if I was to use this as a pour mold, the ceramic piece would never come out. So I have to come in and carve this. Thankfully, I'm unmolding this while it's soft. In the very beginning, when I started mold making, I spent like a day, like a full day, like trying to get the clay portion perfect. Then I learned later on that if you catch the plaster while it's soft, you can do a lot of plaster cleanup, oftentimes a lot faster. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I do the 3-part mold. Alrighty. And I have some wonky texture because I poured plaster in the rain, because I didn't mix up enough plaster, because I was using plaster at the end of the bag for this one, but I'm not worried about it. If I was using this for a slip cast mold, yeah, I'd probably redo it. Alrighty, let's see what happens. Keep it going, keep it going. Yeehaw! That one is important. Oh, that's a nice shape. Any imperfections you want to clean up when it's still wet. Back there is the slump mold. I propped it up on 2 sticks so that I can get some air around the bottom as it dries. It's really important to try and get aeration all around it. Probably want to get rid of sharp edges because as you move these around, the sharp edges tend to chip away, and this way it doesn't chip into your clay. This one needs a second pour if it's successful. Oh, alright, and it is. This one, I'm going to mix up a little bit of plaster and pour it into these 2 cavities. gonna be testing my hump molds. The slump and hump duo that I made, I'm actually gonna test out in another video. They're not quite dry yet, so I'm gonna work on some plates and platters for the dragon. The smaller ones I was able to put by my heater inside and get dried. Unfortunately, these larger ones are not quite as dry as these smaller ones, so I don't know how many of these I'm gonna be able to get on here and see if these will even work. But I do have a little bit of sunshine today, so I'm hoping that being able to set these up in the sun, I might be able to get a good dry. I'm gonna just get to it. I rolled out a ton of slab. I am using some Dave's porcelain because I like the texture of the porcelain. I want these to look like old wooden barrels, worn whiskey barrel kind of look. Imagine like looking down at the top of a whiskey barrel, Viking barrel, right? I've gone through my stash here. I have lots of wood grain textures. Oftentimes I take a wire brush and use that to texture, but I have this weird finial thing that I found at a reclaimed hardware store that is actually made out of resin. It was something to do at a house that hung as like a curtain finial. This makes a really great faux wood texture. It's smoother than my wire brush technique, which is great for a platter, but it still gives me an effective look. It's very easy to use a hump mold if you've never used one before. You're just going to take your slab and hump it over, give it a light trim, and then let it set up until the plaster sucks up some of that moisture. The slab goes from soft slab to leather hard, and then you can pop it off and it's good to go. I have a couple sticks set up here just so that once I lay my slab on, I have an easier time trimming and I can get under here to pick this up. Trying to get under something that's flush with the table, I risk messing up the edges of my slabs. Maybe you want to do it on a board, that way you can pick up the board. I brought this in from the sun. It is already lifting on the edges a little bit, but so it should be stiff enough to turn over. But I want to protect my texture, so I'm going to be flipping it onto this piece of foam. Oy. That was stupid, Diana. Ah, that's what I wanted. Oh, all right, inside's not too bad. I don't want to go with messing too much. I'll just use a finger, get rid of some of these cracks and clean up my edges. And I think this one will be ready. I can go ahead and use this form to do another tray. I always make extra. Also made a larger bowl. The dragon needs somewhere to serve some food on, right? Would like to get these all fired up so you can see them completed. And I think I'm just going to go with clear glaze on the inside only, just the area that the food's gonna touch. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm babbling now. Trying to do too many things. Like having a hard time. There we go. Nice and clean. This did not take too long in the sun. My slabs are very thin, so that helps. All right, this is gonna get wrapped up and I'm gonna transport it wet. I prefer to transport things wet because that way it gives me an opportunity to fix them if something should happen. Also, better chances of surviving the getting there part. Alrighty, y'all, the results are in, and this is exactly why you make double whenever it comes to ceramics. I've had some issues. I have this one big crack here and this slight crack that did not go all the way through in this dish, and then this big crack here. Now this one I had a feeling was coming anyway. Towards the end of the day, I was making the second bowl and I left the bowl on the form too long. It ended up starting to crack to begin with, so I tried to save the crack and I had a feeling it was gonna go anyway. These things happen. The weather on campus has been really wonky and I propped the kiln door open as I normally would. The air kept going from hot to cold and I started getting cracking early on from the way that they were drying. So these two cracks are not surprising. Disappointing, yes, but not surprising. What I have ended up with is one bowl a serving platter, and my dishes. For what I need it for, I think that this is going to be more than enough. Those are headed for the trash, and these are ready to go to be loaded into the Dragon on the ledge that I envisioned them on. So yeah, let's go do that. My plates and platters are all laid out on this top surface. And I've had a chance to paint up all of the bottoms. Hopefully you can see that. But I gotta tell you, I don't think I like this whole just popping them on top of here without any kind of protective anything. So I believe I am in the need of a table runner, a proper table runner. I love these plates and platters. They turned out amazing. I'm super excited about them. They are the absolute look I was going for. I don't think that they plan to be out like this at all times because I am going to have games and things around. Let's see, maybe they can, hopefully, will fit into a bin properly. Oh yeah, the height will fit. I think I'm just going to need something to maybe properly get them in there. Also, I feel like the plates are going to probably be stacked in some sort of stack. So I do have a basket in mind that I want to make, traditional basketry, that will be a stack to hold all the plates in. Perhaps some fabric dividers now that I'm seeing that as I stack, right? Don't want to just stack on top of each other. I need to maybe make some fabric, something that sort of helps cushion the pieces in there. Yeah, these are going to drive me nuts. Anyway. Yeah, so there you have it. The plates are done. I think I'm gonna call this one here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already. Stick around to watch the rest of these projects all unfold as I fill in this interior space. And remember, don't wake the dragon.